All right. Well, thank you guys again for coming, and we're going to get started here with Gartner.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and having Gartner and also Eric. I know we're so appreciative for the opportunity to have this conversation and talk about the metaverse and what's coming next. I know that's an interesting topic when you're figuring out where does this align in sales. My name is Chelsea Gachette, Regional Vice President with the high-tech provider side. I've been with Gartner for just over 7 years, and actually, I started in chairs just like each of you. As a 2015 grad from Kennesaw State University, go Owls, and got a professional sales degree there. So I know exactly what you're going through and the hustle and bustle and enjoying all this new knowledge you're getting in this great profession. What I'd love to talk about too is it's I've seen it from one place to the other. So as you said in that seat today, just know I've had 4 roles over Gartner, been in 3 different states. Really got to start from the individual contributor side and go all the way to the regional vice president side, and sell 4 types of different products. So your best is yet to come. As you learn these skills and being able to leverage them in your career is going to be such an exciting time. And you're going to wake up one day and probably be hosting one of these as well. I'd love to kick it over now to our special guest, Eric Hunter. Eric Hunter's prior life before Gartner, he was with Walt Disney Company, Teradata, Honeywell, and Aflac. He comes here with 20 years of experience and came to Gartner. Actually, I'll never forget his first day. He actually took a call for one of my clients and definitely saved the day there. So I've seen his work in action. It's absolutely fantastic, and his presentation is going to be second to none. Something to take from Eric today is that his background is in data and analytics. He's been doing that for 20 years, helping everything from small to mid-sized to large organizations really understand their growth strategy with data analytics and how to drive business outcomes for B2B buyer demand. So no better person to talk about the emerging technologies with the AI and the metaverse than Mr. Hunter himself. I'll kick it over to Eric. Excited to hear what you have planned for us today.
Thank you very much, Chelsea, for the introduction. And I have to echo, as others have said, it's amazing to see people converging together again at events like this after so much time that we weren't able to. So very exciting. And from a university standpoint, I'm a University of Florida alum. I thought I saw a Florida State logo on the opening slide, so hopefully I'm not too offensive there, and we can get along at the end of the day. But today we're going to hone in or focus on emerging technologies. And at Gartner, I have the privilege of working with tech providers, both from a product and service standpoint, across a myriad of considerations, everything from, hey, we're developing our first product and going to be bringing this minimum viable product to launch. What do we need to navigate through? All the way to things around even tech providers that are really working very hard to acquire funding. And so we, will help those providers navigate through that. But one of the most exciting aspects that I get to work through is focusing on the dynamics and really fast-paced nature of emerging technologies. Now, today, we're going to hone in on 2 specific technologies, artificial intelligence, or AI, and the metaverse. But emerging technologies are inherently messy. They have some pretty rough edges. By definition, many in the business world are trying to identify practical applications for them. And so tech providers have a lot of things they wrestle with internally and a lot of things that they're helping their prospective buyers to wrestle with. And so in our time together today, I don't really intend to go into kind of this futuristic perspective on either. I want to characterize both of these technologies, give you an understanding of where they are in terms of adoption. And one of the things that you'll find out, of course, is that they're both in very different places in terms of their maturity. And so that gives us the unique ability to look at how, from a Gartner standpoint, relative to research and advisory, we come alongside these tech providers and help them deal with some very different concerns and very different challenges on the basis of where a given emerging technology is. And so I thought what we would do, let's begin by looking at the relative popularity of both AI, which you see depicted in blue, and the metaverse, which you see in red. So this is a 3-year look back from Google Trends. And there's a couple of things that immediately jump out here. So first and foremost, we see that AI has been relatively stable in its popularity. In fact, we'd have to go back a couple of years to see kind of the peak or spike. The second thing that jumps out is that from a metaverse standpoint, it's really kind of largely irrelevant here until we get to this October timeframe of last year. And as many of you may recall, this October date last year, October 28th specifically, Mark Zuckerberg stood on a stage and announced that Facebook and other portfolio brands were going to now operate under this new parent brand, Meta. And yes, that drove an amazing amount of people to search, hey, what's Meta? And what's this whole metaverse thing all about? And we can see that, from that point on, Metaverse had, an amazing trajectory in terms of popularity. And now it's far from being irrelevant anymore. And it's really kind of shoulder to shoulder with artificial intelligence in terms of popularity, which is saying quite a bit. So I want to transition now and look at business adoption of these technologies and consumer awareness. We conducted a study focusing on artificial intelligence specifically at the tail end of last year. And one of the things that we look to identify is, hey, what's the overall organizational adoption of AI? And what ended up kind of coming out of that is that 47% of organizations have at least one AI initiative deployed or in use. And, that's a big uptick from a similar study we conducted only 2 years prior. And at that point in time, in 2019, only 35% of organizations could say that. And so when you think of the headwinds that enterprises have been facing over the past 2 years, to go from 35% to 47%, that's saying quite a bit. Now, I want to turn the page and look at Metaverse. And so earlier this year, from a Metaverse standpoint, we had the opportunity to look at consumer awareness and, to some aspect, consumer sentiment about the Metaverse. And one of the first things that we asked is, tell us what you know about the Metaverse. And we found that only 6% of consumers understand the Metaverse and felt like they could describe or characterize that to others. Only 6%. So you may be wondering, what happened to the other 94%? Well, 21% said that, hey, I think I understand this thing, but there's absolutely no chance that I'm going to be able to describe it to somebody else. 38% said they had heard of Metaverse, but really weren't sure about what it meant. And then lastly, 35% said they'd simply never heard of Metaverse. And so this is the very beginning of this year. And, as we see when we compare AI and the Metaverse, both very relevant emerging technologies, both an amazing amount of hype surrounding them, but they're both in a very different place in terms of maturity. And so when we look at that distinction, the priorities that tech providers have for both of these emerging technologies is very different. But that gives us a great opportunity here today to really unpack what those priorities are and how, from a research and advisory standpoint, we guide tech providers through those challenges. So first, I want to dive into Metaverse. And here we see tech providers wrestling with identifying new opportunities, understanding the relevance for their established business model, their established operating model, and maybe where they're going or want to go in the future. And then secondly, we're going to hone in or focus a bit more on artificial intelligence. And in this case, we saw earlier that organizations are wrestling with some different things here. Now we're seeing this big adoption uptick. And so tech providers are focused a bit more around acquiring new customers. So we're going to talk about how, there's certain struggles they face, both from a sales and marketing standpoint, and some of the things that we do to help them navigate through that. So I want to begin by honing in on the Metaverse. And I thought the best way to do that is really level set with this, straightforward definition of what the Metaverse is. So from a Gartner standpoint, we describe a Metaverse as this collective virtual shared space. And it's created by the convergence of two things, a virtually enhanced physical and this virtually enhanced digital reality. So this physical and digital reality kind of converging or coming together. The metaverse is inherently persistent, and I'm going to talk more about that. And it, at the end of the day, provides these enhanced immersive experiences. So when we go beyond this definition and try to put some real context around that, what are some of the capabilities that we see in the metaverse today? Well, you see a few of those at the bottom here. And on the basis of capabilities alone, you might imagine where tech providers are asking, where's the relevance for our target market? Retail, healthcare, a variety of different markets. Where's the relevance for the market that we serve? And as these tech providers begin to unpack the use cases that they have internally and some of the use cases that their clients have, they begin connecting the dots. And we see a significant amount of momentum in terms of understanding and adapting product and service strategies as a result. And I'll go through some illustrative examples of that a bit later. So today, we see metaverse in what we refer to as the emerging metaverse phase. And so from an emerging standpoint, this is really kind of the infancy of the metaverse. Now, despite it really kind of being this first stepping stone on this trajectory I'm going to share in a moment, there's a pretty crowded space. So when you look at this, you'll see that there's providers focusing on experience within the metaverse. You see some focusing on human interfaces, some of which it looks like you were able to use at the social event earlier. You see, this focus as well on a creator economy. But the big deal is here that there's a lot of players. But at the end of the day, in most cases, the experience that we could characterize the emerging metaverse as having today is really that of a walled garden. So most of the providers and experiences today are very siloed. They're very application-based. And there's this lack of interoperability across different providers within the emerging metaverse. And so really today, in many cases, we see the metaverse as this diversion from the physical reality that we operate in. But the good news is that the mature metaverse is really not going to be a diversion. In fact, metaverses are going to be this continuum of things that we're already doing. And so you see this extension into the metaverse. And in the metaverse, certain capabilities like a marketplace or digital commerce, online shopping, social media. These attributes by themselves really could characterize many things, the internet being one of them. And that provides a great cornerstone or basis when we're visualizing what the metaverse is. It's truly an evolution from the present day paradigms and concepts that we know of the internet. But there are 5 distinct realities that are going to really define the mature metaverse. First, as I alluded to earlier, it's going to be persistent. And so in our day-to-day today, we all have this concept of time. And this temporal nature of our life is something that's going to also be reflected in the metaverse. Time is going to have relevance in the metaverse. And it's persistent also in the state that the bankruptcy of a single company or a handful of companies is not going to affect the existence of the metaverse. It's going to continue to grow and exist in perpetuity, through this persistence. The second thing from a metaverse standpoint is that collaboration's a must. So many of the logos, many of the brands that you saw earlier, we're going to see collaboration that really drives and really prioritizes interoperability within the metaverse as a key characteristic. Thirdly, probably no surprise here, but the metaverse is going to be disruptive. So many of the brands and logos you saw earlier that are very relevant today in the emerging metaverse may not be quite so relevant in the mature metaverse. And, in terms of disruption, I just want you to think about things in the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution, moving from the mainframe to the PC area, things that we saw happen in mobile device markets. Now, the fourth reality from a mature metaverse standpoint is the idea of decentralization. Now, before modern web browsers kind of covered this up, when you used to enter a URL, you would always see the prefix HTTP or HTTPS, so Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Well, this is a protocol for the internet. It's a standard. There's not this single company that is going to say, you're allowed to use that to access Amazon.com today, or you're not allowed to use that. Likewise, the decentralized nature of the metaverse means that there's not going to be a single country or a single company that owns the metaverse. Yet, there's going to be a singular metaverse. And I put a question mark there because I want you to think of singular in the context of the internet. Now, I won't give the year, but when I was, doing my undergraduate studies at the University of Florida, there was this thing called America Online and, CompuServe and Prodigy. And so there was this monolithic experience of what it meant to be online. But today, when we look at the internet, you have multiple domains, multiple sites. And so there's singularity in the sense that we have this single internet, but a lot of diversity across that. So from a tech provider standpoint, how do we guide tech providers in making sense of all of this? There's some significant ambiguity, even in what we've characterized so far. Well, one of the bodies of research that we work with clients through is what we refer to as an evolution spectrum. Now, this is just a simple graphic, out of that body of research, but there is quite a bit of additional context beyond this. But what evolution spectrums allow us to do is take things that are very early and rough around the edges and help tech providers to understand the boundaries and characteristics that they can expect today and into the future for a given emerging technology. And so here we see three phases: the emerging metaverse, the advanced metaverse, and the mature metaverse. And from a research standpoint, for each of these phases, we really unpack those on the basis of three characteristics. The first, technology. So from a technology standpoint, what is the state of given technology capabilities today? What do we expect the influence of that technology to be in this given phase? And the same is applied into these future phases. So whether it's natural language processing, computer vision, or haptic bodysuits, all of those things are considered and addressed in terms of technology characteristics. The next is really market characteristic. And here we put the tech provider in the seat and behind the eyes of the buyer. What are the buyer demands in this phase? How are buyer demands evolving? And what adoption expectations can we expect? And you see that adoption trend kind of characterized here through the gradient nature that each phase is characterized by. And then lastly, what are the product and service characteristics that are really going to shape and really define each of these distinct phases? And so what you see here, again, is illustrative of a much larger body of research, but it gives a nice qualitative perspective for tech providers to understand how a given market is going to evolve, and really allows them to begin looking closely at their product and service roadmaps and making some key decisions on things that they need to maybe adjust the priority on, or maybe things that they need to be taking on as big bets. But we complement this research with a second aspect, and this is really market opportunities. And this is a very quantitative aspect to the evolution spectrum. For the sake of simplicity and visibility, I went with a kind of color-based scheme here, but there's quantitative facts and drivers behind all of this. And so what you see for a given technology is the distinct phases, again, emerging, advanced, and mature in the context of the metaverse. And you can see the relative market opportunity that exists for given market segments. Now, I mentioned that technologies like the metaverse are, certainly just emerging. And so we expect to see additional market segments introduced as we progress deeper into the evolution spectrum as well. So on the basis of this context, what do we see happening today? Well, long-term investments abound. You have the Walt Disney Company depicted here, Ford. Even Gucci just recently this week named a CEO of their Metaverse Ventures. We have Dubai that's set to launch the first global virtual city in the Metaverse. And so there is a lot happening today, and we're going to see this dramatic acceleration in terms of corporate investment and tech provider interest in the metaverse. In fact, by 2026, so we're just talking a few years out, 30% of global organizations will have products and services ready for metaverses. So that's an amazing fast forward. And, from a metaverse standpoint, I just want to take a glimpse of some of the things that we can expect to see in an illustrative industry. And we'll focus in on healthcare. And I'll do the same from an AI standpoint, just so we can kind of see the evolution in a given vertical. But early on, we're going to see things from a metaverse context really driving use cases around telemedicine. And then beyond that, we'll begin to see more from a medical training and education standpoint. And then here's where things start to get serious. This is where, we have to have a lot of precision and maturity in the market for some of the other outcomes and use cases. So you'll see things like mental health treatments being, a core part of what the metaverse supports relative to healthcare. And then you'll see surgical procedures. We're going to see the convergence of robotics that we have today that are commonplace now in healthcare, and the convergence of those with the metaverse to drive surgical procedures as a part of the market evolution. So we've just looked at and reflected on the metaverse, and this is a very early growth technology. And I want to pivot now to focus on artificial intelligence. Now, as you might imagine, there's certainly a lot to be said for the relevance of AI in the space of the metaverse. And so I want you to look for some of that as we talk through capabilities and use cases surrounding AI. But in this context, tech provider priorities are very different. So we're going to hone in or focus in on how, from a research and advisory standpoint, we guide tech providers to refine and optimize their marketing and sales effectiveness. Let's also begin here with the definition of AI. You would not believe the number of hours that it took from a Gartner standpoint for us to work through this. Years ago, there were just numerous definitions floating around the market in terms of a common definition. But we define artificial intelligence as the application of advanced analysis and logic-based techniques, including machine learning, to interpret events, support and automate decisions, and ultimately take actions. So when we double click on AI as a technology, more mature technologies have a lot of diverse capabilities underneath those that are followed and invested in from a tech provider standpoint. And so this is illustrative, again, of a much larger body of research we have called impact radars. And there's two things I want to bring to your attention here. First, we look at all of these capabilities and we assess the range until early majority adoption of this given capability. And that's based on how far or close to the center of the radar that capability is. Secondly, we look at the mass, and that's based on the size of each of the capabilities, the little dot there, and the color. And the mass represents the overall breadth in terms of the number of sectors that this capability will impact and the relative disruption it's going to have in that regard. Now, we're focused on tech providers, and just inherent to the name, tech providers have a fascination with technology. And so within their four walls, tech providers see a lot of really impactful capabilities here. Edge AI, AI avatars, amazing relevance there to the metaverse that I mentioned. But they eat, sleep, and drink this constant focus on specific technology capabilities. And the reality is that, in terms of their go-to-market, how they market and sell to prospective buyers ends up just being an extension of that focus on specific technology capabilities. And that prevents some things in terms of overall adoption of AI. From an adoption standpoint, buyers told us in a recent study what their obstacles are. Technology is one of them, but it's really what only 8% conveyed as a key barrier. Skills and data both line up as second and third. And then the biggest in terms of prevention of broader adoption are really business-related concerns and considerations. And that relates to things like it's unable to, we're unable or we have difficulty measuring the value. We don't really understand the benefits and uses, or we have difficulty finding the use cases. But this fixation within the four walls of a tech provider of technology and capabilities leads to a couple of obstacles. And I want to talk about two of those. First, overall messaging and storytelling. This is a fictional company, but illustrative of things that I see day in and day out. So this illustrative header of a website says, "We are the artificial intelligence company." And then you see probably the most canned picture that you could think of in terms of an image that represents this robot or futurism in terms of AI. And so there's this capability saturation of messaging. On the sales side, the typical sales strategy for AI up until very recently has been one of finding an initial sponsor or advocate within a buyer, and then they kind of corral or bring together a group of stakeholders, both from the technology and business side. And then tech providers sit with them for hours. And yes, I've even heard of days going through workshops. And those workshops focus on, hey, here's our capabilities. We have, this set of deep neural networks that do X or Y. Or, hey, from a computer vision standpoint, we can do this. And they go through those capabilities, ultimately looking to understand the use cases that those companies have. And then finally, at the tail end of that several-hour workshop or several-day workshop, they settle on some key outcomes where, the buyer may see some value and alignment, and then they talk further about where to go from there. The reality is you have to flip this. You have to be outcome-led, use case supported, and capability enabled, particularly from an AI standpoint. And so as we look at that from an outcome-led standpoint, we're driving with stories here, again, using healthcare as an example of key outcomes, greater safety of care, reduced readmissions, and the like. We're use case supported and looking at AI-centric use cases that support those core outcomes. And then ultimately, capability enabled, and all those things that you saw on one of the earlier slides that tech providers focus on in terms of their product and service offerings come into light. So what's the linchpin here, really the centerpiece? Well, it's this use case focus. But for tech providers and for buy-side organizations, prioritizing use cases can really be a daunting task. So they will really wrestle with, which use cases apply to our organization. But at the end of the day, they're really wrestling with two dimensions: business value and risk, much like financial markets, value and risk. And so another body of research that we drive and really facilitate both to end user enterprises and to tech providers is what we refer to as AI use case prisms. And I'm highlighting here business value. So we see that consideration again, and feasibility, the equivalency of risk. And so for well over 25 industries and a total of 30 functional areas, we've developed many aspects of research that really create this clear view that allow tech providers and prospective buyers to be on the same page relative to use cases. And so, what that ends up doing is allowing them to look at things that jump out as big wins. They're very feasible and they have a tremendously high business value. But notice, I only have one dot there. So when you see those, you better capture them. Secondly, they see these quick wins. So very feasible, but a little bit lower in terms of business value. And as this kind of builds out, we can see where big bets, have their place. They have a high value, but the feasibility is pretty low. We see our opportunistic investments. And then finally, those use cases that we need to stay away from, the exceptions. So when we translate this again to the healthcare vertical, what does that look like? Well, it looks something like this. So you can see a lot of these healthcare-centric use cases depicted here. And at the end of the day, this is great, but it doesn't complete the picture. So we complement these use case prisms with what we refer to as use case pipelines. And so now you overlay a value chain or a business process on these use cases, and sequencing, prioritization, stakeholder identification, all really begin to kind of take shape. And like I said, there's significant research that complements these visuals, but this helps tech providers and buyers traverse use cases from both a technology perspective and a business perspective. So in summary of our time together today, emerging technologies are vitally important. I mentioned there's a lot of things that I engage and support tech providers in, but emerging technologies are one of those areas that I enjoy the most. And it's of vital importance to maintain relevance and drive differentiation to others in the market. We've illustrated through the metaverse and AI today that there's some varied challenges. All emerging technologies are not created equal. For some, they're wrestling with trying to do things in terms of product strategy. For others, there's things they're wrestling in terms of maybe talent acquisition and retention. And then lastly, from a research and advisory standpoint, I've illustrated through 3 or 4 different bodies of research how we come alongside tech providers and really help them unpack the rough edges of emerging technologies and help them to refine their product strategy, their go-to-market, sales, and marketing effectiveness. It's been a privilege to walk through this with you today. I wanted to open up and just see, with the last few minutes we have, if there's, maybe any questions we wanted to address.
Yeah, Eric, absolutely fantastic. Definitely see why you're the top analyst last year, analyst of the year for 2021, after breaking down such a complex topic. I realize emerging technology is the focus of our keynote today. What I was really curious relative to early, growth tech providers, even in the marketing lens for this group, how common would you say addressing an emerging technology like this is for them? Like, how common should it be in their practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we see a lot of really small providers that are pre-revenue, maybe into the single or double-digit millions. Really, the whole crux and core of their organization is based on that. And so for them, we see it north of 50% of their focus. And then more mature or established providers, they're really working through making some key pivots where disruption has kind of landed upon them. These smaller early growth providers are really kind of lighting the wick, if you will, that's leading them to need to make some changes, platform or technology wise. And so for them, it's a more minority focus. I would probably put it in the 10 to 20% range. But as they hone in on those pivots, it becomes a very impactful part of their strategy and operations.
That makes so much sense, and it gives us a good perspective on it's going to get here, right? But are you prepared for it, and what can you do now with it to capitalize? I'd love to kick it to the room. I think there's a student that has a question to share with you, Eric. I'll kick it over to the group.
Perfect.
I think we maybe have time for one question. Is there one question? Anyone from the audience that has a question? No questions? There's a question.
With the microphone up front.
What do you think about investing in cryptocurrency?
Oh, good question. So there's quite a bit of debate on that. On the basis of cryptocurrency, when we look at blockchain as a backbone, it's going to have some amazing impacts. One of the core tenets from a Gartner analyst standpoint is we're not allowed to give investment advice. So I can't go into giving formal investment advice on cryptocurrency. But what I will say is the backing of that from a blockchain standpoint has amazing relevance. And, we're going to continue to see blockchain implications and, value that's driven across so many industries. So I think that the best is yet to come.
Amazing. Thank you, Eric.
Perfect. I'd love to pass it back to Madison so our next group can go. Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you so much for letting us be a part of your session today.
Everybody wave to that camera. That's where they can see us out of. Thank you, guys.